Hello, I'm Mark Baer, and you are watching the YourTown television program. I am with Frank Priscaro this morning, who is a branding expert and a photographer. Welcome.
Mark, thanks, Mark.
So,
thanks for having me.
Our time is short. Let's jump right in with
Okay.
with your background in branding, and just give me a bit of a rundown about what you've been doing.
Well, so I used to own an advertising agency, and I increasingly felt like a man whose only tool is a hammer, so everything begins to look like a nail. And so I got out of that and began to develop this branding practice where I could really address a lot of different issues that companies have, because I came to the conclusion that everything communicates something, and to just have that communication limited to advertising is really far too limited for what companies need to communicate these days.
And advertising is external. Branding is both internal and external.
Well, yeah.
And so I guess just for our viewers, because everybody thinks they know, but they don't. So what is branding and what isn't branding?
Well, I think that branding is probably the most misunderstood concept in civilized commerce, probably because there's been so much written about it and so much discussed about it, and it really has evolved over the course of the last 40 or 50 years. It used to be that when the media wasn't so prevalent, it used to be that the prevailing wisdom about branding was that you could create an image that a company would have, and you could sort of broadcast that to the outside world, and people would believe that, right? And that, just doesn't happen anymore, because there is so much, there are so many other avenues that expose the truth about a company. And we see this every day. You have, we talked before about United Airlines, right? Who, spends hundreds of millions of dollars on advertising trying to convince people that flying is not as horrible as it really is.
Friendly.
Yes. And so the irony of that is that, here we are, everybody has a camera, everybody has a TV camera, right, these days in their pocket. So now anything that happens, small or big, gets recorded, and it gets broadcast, and depending on the severity of it, it flies through social media, right? So just to contrast that with the way things used to be, there's a great scene in the Netflix series, The Queen, and Elizabeth and Philip are having an argument in the garden, and there's a TV crew there that's capturing this, and she suddenly realizes, oh my God, I'm being, the king and queen are being filmed having an argument, and she walks up to the photographer, and before she can say anything, he takes the film out of his camera and gives it to her. Would that ever happen today? Absolutely not. But there was a time in the evolution of all this, in the evolution of communications and what gets communicated, where some things just weren't done. And that's long gone out the window.
That's long. The polite days are over.
No, that's.
But what I'm hearing you say is that branding really starts internally, and what's the difference between branding and corporate culture?
Well, I don't think there's a lot of difference between that. In fact, I think that it's been said that culture eats strategy for breakfast, and what that means is that you can only do things that are authentic to who you are and what you are. Excuse me. And trying to create some sort of a strategy to do something that's not sort of endemic to the culture is hopeless, because excuse me, you just can't you can't get that done. There's a great article about the founder and CEO of Chobani, Hamid Ulukaya. It was written up in Fast Company, and it was also just on 60 Minutes. Excuse me. And it talked about the culture that he's built at Chobani, where about a third of the employees that he has are immigrants, and about 400 out of 2,400 of those are refugees. So he's purposely trying to open the company in order to give the people who are in the most desperate straits a chance to make a living here, to become Americans, and he's kind of gone out of his way to do that. This is because he's a refugee himself. He fled Turkey because of a repressive regime there, and has built a company built on these very human values, right? So contrast that with, say, a company like Uber, which is, I'm not sure what it's built on. It's built on this sort of, rich, frat boy culture that, where you have, the person running the company, Travis Kalanick, who's just he just misbehaves constantly, and so I guess my point is that both of those men have created a culture that becomes the brand, because it really is just when the culture sort of leaks out and becomes external, people experience it as the brand, and then that becomes the company's reputation. And that can't be hidden, it can't be managed, it can't be massaged. It is what it is.
So you're saying at the core of any brand, it better be authenticity, or else it's going to show itself sooner or later.
Well, yeah, eventually. I mean, nothing's really hidden anymore in this culture, in this society that we have. So if the brand isn't authentic, then what is it? And that's going to be revealed, somewhere along the line.
And now, how much of brand is, again, what we do? In other words, are we do we build cars? Are we a transportation company? Are we, in other words, of really knowing who you are and self-identity?
Yeah, I think that's really kind of the hard part if the people who run the company are not very self-aware, right? So Ulukaya, for example, describes himself as a nomad and a warrior. I mean, he began life as a shepherd, right? But in business, he's extremely competitive. He wants to make the best product available, and so he has this side of him that's very competitive. On the other hand, he's also a humanitarian, and that comes through in his in his business as well.
Starbucks is the same. We know who are. We're starting to know who the good players are. Let's talk more personally some of your successes with branding and some of the interesting situations you've been in.
Well, excuse me. Some of the things that I've sort of learned along the way is that the organization has a personality, and that personality comes directly from the person who runs the company. And to the extent that personality wants to come out and express itself, then my work is pretty successful. To the extent that personality does not, wants to be hidden, wants to portray something else other than what's really there, then my work is not successful at all. And typically, my work, I work primarily with startup companies. I like to try to get these companies before they get too screwed up, as they get bigger and bigger and bigger, and to try to put them in touch with, their authentic values and what they want to accomplish in the marketplace. And those engagements work really well because our purposes are aligned. The engagements that don't go well are people who are trying to be something that they're not. And it's typically larger companies who are trying to manage how they're seen, try to rebrand themselves. It's like, you're not going to rebrand anything. You are who you are, and if you think that people don't know that, you're crazy, because that gets communicated too.
You worked with Apple at some point.
Very early on.
Yeah.
It was a pretty interesting phenomenon. I've actually worked with quite a few Silicon Valley's largest companies when they were really small: Intel, Adobe, Sun Microsystems, and Apple. And the imprint of the founder on a company that size is just can't be overstated. When Steve Jobs was in a meeting and excoriated somebody for doing something stupid, that rippled through the organization like you wouldn't believe. The closer that founder is to the kind of to the pulse of the company, the more impact it has. So I think what we see happening as some of these companies have gotten larger is that while they retain some of the ethos, some of the culture of the person that started it, it's hard for the successors to really carry that on, because they're not the charismatic, visionary founder. They're typically people who are grounded in operations and whose job it is to make the trains run on time. And that's a very different skill set.
When is it time to rebrand?
Well, I think it's time to rebrand when the company decides that it wants to do or be something else. And there are very few companies that are successful at that. IBM happens to be one of them, for example. You've had, under Gerstner, they started this.
They've really moved to Watson as the center.
Yeah. So they've really, this is a company that made, typewriters, and, 100 years ago. And so you've sort of had this progression where the company has gone through a bunch of these different transformations, but has always managed to maintain its leadership, managed to maintain, in some way the company's, personality that was, set by the founders, the Watsons, Thomas Watson, right? And the company has continually been able to kind of reinvent itself. And that's when the rebranding really works, because once again, it starts internally. It changes the culture, and then that begins to permeate throughout not only just the communications but the actions that the company is taking.
Okay, let's move on to photography. And
okay.
You've been both taking photographs here you're a fairly recent arrival on the Monterey Peninsula. And as we were discussing, it's like living in a postcard here. So it's not an easy place. It seems like it'd be easy for a photographer, but it's not, because everything's beautiful.
Yes, there's a little too much input.
Yeah, and so we're gonna sample three parts of your work, and we're going to start with what you call mood. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to put some pictures on the screen. Let's start with this.
Yeah. So this photograph is called "If Monet Painted the Ocean." A friend of mine who owns this photograph fell in love with it and said to me, "This photograph captures that time of night on the beach where I know what's going to happen now. I've experienced this, and this has all these wonderful memories associated with it. It's that time of sunset where the day's over and you sort of move from maybe outside to inside, but there's this just evoked sort of a feeling for her that she loved and identified that with the photograph. And this is called A Simple Twist of Fate. It's just a simple red rope tied around sort of a rope railing for a boardwalk on the beach. But there was something kind of mysterious and a little melancholy about it and I just thought it was something that needed to be captured. And this is a great restaurant in Charleston, South Carolina. I call this photograph Cool Inside. And it was a hot day kind of in the middle of the summer when we were there. And you can feel the sun sort of, beating off the face of this building, and how it's faded the paint, and you can almost feel the humidity in the shot. It's one of my favorites.
Okay, these are moments we're going to now.
Yeah. So this is How Does Your Garden Grow? This is up on that lonely stretch of 101. I just thought it was kind of fascinating that you could see how this garden was planted and how it's been tended and watered. And
these two, this is fabulous.
yeah, thanks. This is Ascension. This is actually a small pond that that gets made on the beach after the tide recedes. This bird for quite some time, and was fortunate enough to just have my finger on the shutter as it took a bath and then decided it was time to head out for the day.
And this is where we live.
Yeah, this is Carmel Curler. This is a wave at Carmel Beach with the sun going down behind it. And I just tried to capture the light in the top of the wave and have the sun kind of shine through that.
Okay, so this last bunch is called Isolated Moments.
Yeah, isolated incidents.
Isolated
actually.
incidents.
So this was taken in Amsterdam. This is a shot I call Double Fantasy. I happened to be walking home and see this couple before the
lingerie
before the lingerie display, and I thought, this is good for everybody. so I managed to get that shot. And this series is, it's just these sort of, as the title suggests, just these isolated moments that happen. This is called Lap of the Gods. This is in one of the gardens in Paris. You got one of the gods reclining in a statue, and then a Parisian in a chaise lounge chair, sort of in the same position. And this shot, Sacrifice to the Water Gods. I was actually driven down this road to take a shot of the sky, which was really dramatic, and I turned around and realized I'd parked next to this guy, so it was obviously a photograph I was meant to take.
So anyway, this is fabulous stuff.
Thanks.
You're going to have to come back. This is not enough time for us. I'm Mark Baer. You're with Frank Priscaro and I. This is YourTown TV. We'll be back. Thank you.